The Helix model is a new linguistic structure and language analysis that adopts a circular configuration. The world is not linear. History is not linear. What appears to be a line is a small snippet of a large circle.
A long straight road is actually curved. For instance, a road might appear to be straight. But suppose there were an extremely long road that starts out in Tokyo, then extends toward the Asian continent, winds across Europe, then stretches across the Atlantic Ocean, spans America and the Pacific, and merges back to its origin in Tokyo. People in Tokyo might think the road is completely straight. People in Paris, London, and New York might also think the road is straight. People who drive on the road and go around the world might sense that the road is completely straight. But when someone who is out in space views the road, it's possible to see that it's actually curved, and the curve is a circle that makes its way back to its origin. Linear is a two-dimensional concept. Suppose there are some people that live in a two-dimensional world. These people can imagine what it is like living in a three-dimensional environment, but they do not experience it directly. Some people living in two dimensions never realize that a three-dimensional world exists. They experience the effects of the cycles, but they don't perceive it as a cycle. They think they're born, go down a straight line, then die. Linear is a two-dimensional concept. Suppose there are some people that live in a two-dimensional world. These people can imagine what it is like living in a three-dimensional environment, but they do not experience it directly. Some people living in two dimensions never realize that a three-dimensional world exists. They experience the effects of the cycles, but they don't perceive it as a cycle. They think they're born, go down a straight line, then die. Some people realize that there is a cycle, but don't realize how many of them there are. So how many cycles are there? The answer is an infinite amount. There are so many cycles that if they were amassed together, they would form something like a black hole. The clump of cycles around us are thick, dense, and ordered. And how many dimensions are there? There's the first dimension, a point. The second dimension, which could be represented as a group of lines on a flat plane that intersect with each other. The third dimension, which could be represented as a group of endless circular springs that intersect with other endless circular springs. The person living in the second dimension actually lives in the third dimension as well. That person does not fully understand the third dimension, but the second dimension is included in the third dimension. Likewise, the person living in the third dimension lives in the fourth and fifth dimensions, although that person does not fully understand the fourth or fifth dimension. If a person in the first dimension were to move around in a circular pattern on the second dimension, they would create a circle. A person in the second dimension will be able to perceive the circle if they stretch out flat on the second dimension. But the person in the first dimension would not be able to understand the concept of a circle. Likewise, if a circle in the second dimension is rotated along a line as its axis, it would create a sphere in the third dimension. A person in the third dimension will be able to see the resulting ball in the third dimension, but the person in the second dimension would only encounter a circular line, and a person in the first dimension would only see a dot. In order for the person in the first dimension to create a circle, an extra element, time, is required. So the person in the first dimension can create things in the second and third dimensions if they have time. The first, second, and third dimensions are spatial. With the addition of time, the first dimension can become a second dimension or a third dimension. Note that no matter how many dots are connected to form a line, there is always space between the dots. This is because in an imperfect world, the line perceived by humans is not actually a seamless line. It is a string of dots that are perceived as connected. When a human sees a solid line, they're actually just seeing a bunch of dots, which are so closely packed together that the line appears to be unbroken. This is because the human brain is wired to fill in the blanks and create what would be perfect when it actually is not. Although the person in the second dimension is restricted, they can see photographs and pictures of a ball and understand in part what a ball is like, although their understanding of the third dimension would be limited. If the ball were rotated along a plane as its axis in the third dimension, it would create an entity in the fourth and fifth dimensions. Humans cannot understand this in full, but they can see something like the fourth and fifth dimension when they stare out into space and see infinity, or when they consider how time could continue to infinity. This is similar to the person on the second dimension seeing pictures of a ball in the second dimension, but not fully comprehending what the ball is in the third dimension. So people might think the first dimension, a point, is insignificant compared to a line or a plane, but actually, a point is a merging of lines and planes, so a point contains all the aspects of the second, third, fourth, and fifth dimensions and more, making it a miracle. For instance, all the points in space pass through all the points in time. All the points in time pass through all the points in space. The chances of a particular point in time intersecting with a particular point in space is minuscule. It is so small that it could be called a miracle. For instance, suppose a train line bound from Tokyo to London intersects with a train line bound from Alaska to India. The intersection could take place anywhere along the Tokyo-London line, or it could also take place anywhere between the Alaska-India line. The intersection could be near Tokyo and near Alaska, or near London and near India. The number of possible intersections on these two train lines is infinite. If all the possible intersections along these two lines were placed on a sheet of white paper using gold ink, the paper would be a cluster of gold. This is only in the second dimension. If the model were expanded to the third dimension, it would be a gold clump rather than a gold plane. The first dimension, a dot, is a merger of the second, third, fourth, and fifth dimensions. It contains a wealth of information. Viewed from the third dimension, it is possible to see that second dimension lines and third dimension planes are slicing through the dot. So the dot is also a golden point. So all the dimensions, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, and so on, are chock full of dots, lines, and curves, and are completely flooded with golden connections. This explains why a butterfly flapping its wings can create a storm on the other side of the world. Anything that anyone does has implications on the whole world. This is because everything and everyone is connected by these invisible lines, planes, and fourth and fifth dimension links. This is why things that happened in the ancient past can and do affect us today. The same holds true for the future. Things that people do in the future affect the people living in the past. Only humans in the current world are restricted by time, so they're not able to perceive it this way. Only someone living outside of time would be able to fully understand how the future could affect the present. Humans can only see snippets of the whole Helix system. The helix makes it possible to explain many different phenomena on the same structure. The things in the universe are circular, not linear as such. History repeats itself. The stock market booms and busts in cycles. The temperature rises and dips regularly by season, within a season, and within one day. It is not possible in this world to see all of the cycles at one glance. We see snippets here and snippets there, and intersections between these snippets. The helix model makes it possible to connect things that are not normally considered on the same page. It is possible to postulate that spatial connections over time are the fourth dimension, and expanding space is the fifth dimension. In linguistics, the helix model makes it possible to connect the various disciplines of language to each other, as well as to the real world.